Hello my friends, welcome to my channel, Lindy's Magpie Reads. I'm Lindy, I read a lot, and I have got 6 great books to tell you about today, so I'm going to get right to it. Starting with Aednan, an epic by Linnea Axelsson. This author is Swedish. The book was translated by Saskia Vogel. Here's my cat. It's written entirely in verse, and I am going to read a little bit from it in just a bit after I tell you more about it. It covers a span of about 100 years, starting in, I think, 1913 and going through to 2016. When this book was published in 2018, it won a major literary award in Sweden. The title, it means the land, the earth, my mother, and it is about 2 families of Sámi people, an indigenous people from northern Scandinavia. And early on in the story, the governments of Sweden, Norway, and Finland decide that they will no longer allow cross-border migration of the traditional roots of the Sámi people with their reindeer. They're a nomadic people, and they were arbitrarily assigned, different families were assigned countries that they had to stay in, and so that meant that they had to find new places to graze and so on. And then in the 1940s, a hydroelectric dam was built in northern Sweden, Vattenfall, and the place that this one particular Sámi family had been relocated to was inundated, so they had to be moved again, and then some years later they had to move again as the waters rose again when they needed to dam more water. There was conflict between the new Sámi arrivals and their kinsmen who said, those are our reindeer pastures, you can't graze yours there. There were just so many aspects of Sámi life that reminded me of the same or similar issues that happened in Canada with our indigenous peoples here, like forced relocation and the Sámi children having to attend residential nomad schools where their language was forbidden, loss of language and culture, and of course land rights issues. And that's one thing that also comes up in here. In 2015 there are some court cases about land rights, and so descendants in this family that we're following are participating in that. Again, echoed with events here in Canada. Some of the Sámi traditions that are mentioned in here are things that I had heard about in another book that I read recently, Stolen, by Helen Lestadius. I will link information to that book down below and the video where I talked about it as well. That one is also about Sámi people. As in this book, we see what happens when the Sámi people give up herding reindeer and live in towns instead. And there's a question about whether or not they're still considered Sámi. The particular earmarking technique that they use to identify reindeer, I learned about in that other novel, and it's mentioned in here as well. And then there are scenes in here that I was able to identify with from my own experience. So a mother and daughter are driving down the highway, and they come to a carcass of a reindeer laying there on the road, and an eagle takes off. And this has happened to me in the Yukon, where suddenly from a carcass on the road, an eagle takes off, the 6-foot wingspan. It's so impressive. Now, of course, this family is also concerned with which family is that reindeer a member of, and the ear markings are going to show that. There's a type of singing called yoiking that I had not heard of before. This is a practice that was illegal for a period of time, and I had to look up some examples online, and I will link a video below in case you're interested. A beautiful, beautiful way of creative expression. So here's a little bit to give you a flavor. This is what it looks like on the page. Very sparse. 1920. That fall, the Lapp administration arrived. The ruling language drizzled over us. Swedish words impossible to pronounce. They penetrated our clothes, coated our skin. That needling eye, a rain through all that one loves. Now we're going to go all the way ahead to 2016, when the land rights case was won. There's no chance that the judge will let this victory go all the way to the Supreme Court, and the hope wilted, shriveled. A spring leaf in my hand, so brittle. The branchwork of history finally embedded. Mama had said that considering how the state's attorneys behaved during this land rights trial, she didn't think reconciliation was possible. And one last bit. This is 1989. So the text moves forward and backward through time, but there is some kind of cyclical feel to it, the cycles of nature. There's so many gorgeous descriptions of forest and rocks and rivers and lichen. And this is about an old power station that's become a tourist destination. Now she was going to read about its great exploit in the backwoods, its pioneer power stations in the wilderness. How long would they keep getting away with writing our actions and our grazing grounds, our entire cultural landscape out of history, by calling everything wilderness and backwoods? The power station a castle in the midst of the forest. They'd eagerly cleared away the lichen, trampled on our language, upset our sete. Now I walk around here, guiding tourists. And this passage brought to mind a book by the Canadian Quebecois cartoonist Pascal Blanchette. The English title is White Rapids, and it's about a town that was created in the northern Quebec wilderness, where the people were there specifically for building a hydroelectric dam. And when he spoke at a library that I worked at, I asked him about the people who had been in that area prior to the dam being built, and his response was, there were no people there. Yeah, I didn't believe him, but that is the colonial message. And this book is about colonialism's effect on these families over a century, and I loved it. I am going to listen to this in audio. You know, it's one of those books that from the time that I finished it, I wanted to read it again. So I've got my name on the waiting list for an audio edition. It's a book that's heavy going, even though it's written so sparsely, And so I found that I needed to take breaks with other books. But when I picked up this one, The Sea in You by Jessi, Sheron, I read it in one sitting. It is a graphic novel, a lesbian retelling of The Little Mermaid. And we've got a teenage character who, she's very goth, and her boyfriend, who's in a band, is undermining her self-confidence. He is really bad for her, and she meets a mermaid, and I think that's enough for you to get the gist of the plot. Quite fun. And next up, another graphic novel. This one much more serious. This one is nonfiction. Diaries of War. 2 visual accounts from Ukraine and Russia. And the author is the illustrator Nora Krug, who's a German who now lives in the US. I really want to pick up her memoir in graphic novel format called Belonging. I think it'll be excellent. In 2022, so right after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, Nora approached a couple of people that she knew, a woman who's a journalist in Ukraine and an artist in St. Petersburg in Russia, and asked them if they were willing to be interviewed every week to talk about their personal experiences of what it was like with this war going on. Of course, at that time, they didn't know how long things would last. This book covers a period of 52 weeks. And she has kept their identities hidden, a secret, on their request for safety reasons. In Russia, it is illegal to speak against the war or the army, and people risk imprisonment and worse. And the Ukrainian journalist is traveling back and forth between Ukraine and Denmark, where her mother is, and her 2 young children have been resettled there to be in safety during the war. But she and her husband are both journalists, so they're, and also men are not allowed to leave Ukraine. So there's so much feeling of being unsettled and lots of devastation of what's happening from the war. The Russian artist is anti-war and against the actions of Russia, and he does a lot of hand wringing. I don't know what to do. And he also considers emigrating somewhere else with his wife and their children. But that's not such an easy thing to do. And all the little details of their lives really add a personal aspect to the impact of war on individuals. And the style that Krug has used is the Ukrainian journalist on one side of the page always, and the Russian artist on the other side. And she never shows entire bodies. So partly that will keep the anonymity of her sources, but also the idea that life is being lived in fragments, and also that these things could be happening to anybody. They could be happening to us. So there's that combination of both the specific and yet the general, and I found this really, really moving. And so this was another book that I had to take breaks as I was reading it. But I'm really glad that I did. I'll just read a little bit from the Russian artist who says, "I hope the Russian army will lose the war. At the same time, I don't want those ordinary soldiers to die. I find myself wishing that Putin will die. This feels bad because I never used to wish death on anyone. Now I feel such a desire. There is a cognitive dissonance in my head." The family has a dog, and if they emigrate, there'll be a lot of difficulty bringing the dog with them. They don't have a car, a dog can't go on a bus, and yeah, so there's both small and large challenges. These next 3 books that I'm going to tell you about are all by Canadian authors, starting with the Journey Prize stories. This is volume 33 of this annual collection, and this particular volume is all Black writers, the best of Canada's new Black writers. So the selection committee, it was David Chariandy, Edugyan, and Canisia Lubrin. And before I go further, I just want to mention that Canisia Lubrin, Canadian poet, much award-winning author, has written her first novel. So this debut is called Code Noir. I have not started it yet, but I'm quite excited about it. I will tell you more about it soon. I sometimes keep the receipt when I buy a book, and this one I bought in February of 2023, which is when it came out, and I was hoping to read it for Black History Month last year. Well, I did it this year. There are some authors that I recognized in here, including Jasmine Seeley and Tea Mutangi. Tea Mutangi has a collection of short stories, Shut Up, You're Pretty, that is currently in the running for the Canada Reads Prize. I will link more information about Canada Reads down below. Hello. And then one of the really exciting things about collections like this is that I get introduced to new authors. So for example, there's a queer Somali writer, A.Z. Farah. Her story in here is called Pilgrimage, and I found out in the information in the back that she's working on a novel. Excited to see that come out. I also flagged a passage in here that is a reference to Tim Hortons, and you might remember if you've been following my channel that I collect references, literary references to Tim Hortons. I collect these references on my book blog, by the way. And the other kind of reference that I have been collecting, and I come across them much less often, is reference to trepanation, which is drilling a hole in your skull. And this next book has a trepanation reference. It's called The Future by Catherine Leroux, and it's translated from French by Susan Ouriou. Now this one is also in the running for Canada Reads. All of that Canada Reads debate is going to be going on next week. If you're interested, follow the links below. I'm rooting for Denison Avenue by Christine Wong and Danielle Innes. This one did not start out promising for me. So I listened to the audiobook, and it is read by Karie Richards. For some reason, I do not like the voice of this narrator. A week or two ago, I tried a different audiobook that she narrated, and I could have sworn it was an AI-generated voice. I am going to play a little clip for you so you can hear her voice, and I would love to know what you think.
Dealers watch the young girls sidle up. A darkness grows inside the cruel and elastic part of their being that expands in moments such as this and contracts at others. When someone sings, when there's hot food to eat, when the stars befriend their fatigue. But now, a drum beats in their sinews as Raska's little fingers slide a few muddy bills into the paw of the taller dealer who hands over a baggie, a few pebbles weighing next to nothing, even as they weigh tons. Raska doesn't bother putting the baggie in her pocket. She has no pockets in her dress that's grown too short over the spring, that spurs everything to sprout. There is no place where she can hide things on her person because she is 5.5. All her secrets are exposed.
Yeah, is it just me? Or what? Anyway, I decided to persevere because this is a story I did really want to listen to. It's set in an alternate Detroit. They call it Fort Detroit, a city that never became American. It stayed French. And there are strange goings on, somewhat magical elements. There are sort of feral children living in camps in the woods, in the trees, not trusting adults. That part actually reminded me of the book Beowulf by Zach Weimersmith. But this is much darker, much darker. Anyway, when I'm giving an audiobook a chance, I will at least listen to 1 or 2 chapters before I give up on it. And in this case, the first chapter is 3 hours long. And I did persevere. I had enough activities to interest me. I've been working on a pair of gloves, and so as I was knitting, I was listening to this audiobook. Well, fortunately for me, I started liking it in chapter 2. So, I don't know, the audiobook is 9 or 10 hours long, and I couldn't give it more than 4 stars because that first part really didn't work for me. Your mileage may vary, of course. This book did win a major award in Quebec in its original language, but it took me that long to get into it. Once I was finally into it, yes, I could really appreciate it, and I could say I liked it quite a bit, but not my favorite. My favorite, my absolute favorite of all 6 is Helen Humphreys' new novel, Followed by the Lark. It's historical fiction, and it's based on the life of Henry David Thoreau. So starting from the time when he was about 5 years old until his death in the mid-1800s. And, it's so soul-soothing, all of the references to nature, and what a kind, sensitive soul Thoreau was. I learned that his family had a pencil making factory right next to their house. I learned that they were abolitionists who helped people escaping slavery. Mostly, I learned about the kind of man who would be so enamored with measuring nature that it was a compulsion, and that compulsion was a comfort to him. I could understand that. He made money by doing survey work. It was entirely suited to his nature. He was a school teacher for a very short period of time, but when the superintendent told him that he was expected to punish students, whether they did anything wrong or not, he had to give up that job. Helen Humphreys is an auto-buy author for me, Canadian author who lives in Ontario, and I adore the way that she writes about nature. So, here are some passages. The crabapple on Emerson's property had come into flower, great pink drifts of blossom and a wheel of scent that rolled towards Henry as he walked towards the tree. He liked to stand beneath it with his eyes closed, listening to the whir of the bees as they fumbled the blossoms above his head. It was the coldest winter they could remember, days and days of a wind so sharp that they couldn't go 3 steps from the front door before turning back. The milk froze in the pail, the spittle froze on their lips when they tried to talk. When Alec tried to cut down a chestnut tree in front of their house, his axe broke. The family huddled by the fire through most of the day. At night, their beds were weighted down with so many bedclothes that they were pinned there like moths for the whole miserable night. Even with all his attention, with his daily walks, with writing everything down, it was impossible to keep on top of spring. At a certain point, it just raced ahead, and Henry was left stumbling behind, never able to catch up to what was blooming or fruiting or here on the wing. He used to be frustrated by this, but now that he was older, he just gave over to it when it happened. He was even a bit relieved when it did happen, when spring became a green furnace that burned through every hour. And that was followed by the Lark, and that is all I've got for you today. Thank you so very much for listening. I really appreciate that you watch my channel, and I love hearing from you. So please say hello in the comments down below, or just put in a little bird emoji or something like that if you don't know what to say. I wish you all well, and I will be seeing you again soon. Bye for now.